From stories involving missed calls, an escape room, mirrors, a cave, and night terrors, tonight we have 5 stories that will surely give you a hard time falling asleep. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers for allowing me to share their stories. Without them, this video wouldn't have been possible. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Complete darkness is something no one can accurately describe. I sat on the cold concrete ground surrounded by utter blackness. A blackness so deep, I couldn't even see my hands as I lifted them in front of me. The air was thin and stale, causing short inhales followed by longer, shaky exhales. My back was pressed against an equally cold concrete wall as I peered strongly into the darkness, attempting to force my eyes to adjust to this place, devoid of even the smallest light. Breathing sounds emanated from the seemingly eternal blackness in front of me. These were not my breaths. Hello? A light, male voice emitted from the dark. The soft whimper was clear in this completely silent place. My sense of hearing was the only sense I could trust. His confused and frightened plea got my attention quickly as I turned my head towards the source. I opened my mouth to speak, but another sound in the opposite direction caught my attention. Hey, where are you? Who are you? A deeper voice broke through the stale air. I remained quiet. Please don't hurt me, man. The softer voice pleaded. I don't know what's going on. I'm not gonna hurt you. I don't know why I'm here. The deep voice offered in a lower tone. Several seconds of silence filled the air as the echo from his voice slowly faded. I moved to speak yet again, but was once again interrupted. You guys? What's happening? I don't know what this is either. I went to bed and woke up here. I don't remember anything. Another disembodied voice stated from directly in front of me. I had to say something to make them aware of my presence. Hey, me too. I have no memory after going to sleep. I just woke up here, cold and in the dark. Who are you people? I said hurriedly, trying to get my words in before someone else spoke. Tell me who you are first. The deeper voice snapped back. I was thrown off by his sudden anger, but understood it. The voice on the other side of the room spoke up first. My name is Evan. I'm scared, man. We need to find a door or something. The jittery voice said, clearly becoming more and more terrified as his words progressed. There were several more seconds of quietness as the complete silence allowed an audible heartbeat from my chest. I'm Luke, but we're not getting anywhere getting to know each other. Let's try and get the hell out of... His commands were interrupted by a loud buzzing sound, filling the entirety of the room. A dim, red glimmer appeared in the darkness. A small amount of light provided a reddish hue, lighting up one section of the room. I slowly began to sit up. I was interrupted by the sight of a silhouetted hand reaching for the light. What the hell is this? Luke's voice whispered in a much lower, still deep voice. A figure began to appear on the other side of the light. I don't know, but this might be the way out, David said with a confident tone. I moved towards them to join in on the discussion. The room was still eerily dark as I could not make out my fellow captives, other than darkened shadows. The red light was somewhat beckoning as I slowly moved toward it. It didn't take long for the 4 of us to arrive at the light source. It's a power box, David said as soon as I arrived. We need to find what it's powering. That's a start at least. Hey guys, look. Evan said as he ripped a small piece of paper off the side of the box. Evan took a few seconds to review what the small paper had to offer. His eyebrows furrowed in the red hue as he slowly looked up. He slowly handed the paper to David, who began reading it aloud. On 2 days complete, you will have reached a great feat. Your freedom you'll meet. David read with a whisper, slowly lowering the notes as he read. A tearing sound was heard next to me. Guys, there's another one on this side too, Luke said while angling the freshly torn note under the little light there was. To leave forever, couples must work together. 4 were more clever, Luke said in a straightforward and flat tone. As Luke let out an exhale through his nose, a shadow appeared to wave underneath the box. Another piece of paper. This time, I moved to grab it. The red light washed the newly found slip of paper in an almost blood-red light. I began reading. Your stalkers will watch, as we count down with each notch. Death pairs with each botch. My son, attempting to say it like the poem it was meant to be. Damn it. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Is this some deranged fanboy of horror movies trying to get his rocks off by scaring us? Evan shouted as we all straightened up from his sudden outburst. Shut the hell up, man. Luke growled in his intimidating deep voice. Even though we were all bathed in shadows, I could feel the two glaring at each other. The standoff didn't last long, however. Another loud buzzing sound was heard. Directly behind Luke, a rectangular light began to appear. A door was opening. This was our way out. We moved towards the door as a white light filled the room. The confines of the room we had been in appeared before us. The tiny, dark room was beginning to fill with an almost welcoming light. As we approached the door, sobbing was heard from behind us. The 4 of us stopped in our tracks and slowly turned our frames to look behind us. As the light began to travel across the walls, a huddled body began to light up in the corner. Tears covered his cheeks as the young man in front of us held his knees to his chest. David immediately pivoted to approach the frightened man. Hey, who are you? Why didn't you tell us you were there? David said in a soft voice, as to not frighten this poor person who was clearly terrified. I'm scared. I didn't know who any of you were, where I am, or what I'm doing here, he said with heavy sobs in between each word. We're going to get you out of here, buddy. David replied, trying to offer as much support as he could. David reached out his hand. The young man, whom we discovered later was named Taylor, quickly grasped David's hand as he pulled him up to his feet. After a quick, motivating pat on the shoulder, David led him from the corner as we moved to finally make our exit. We stood in a quiet gaze as we absorbed our surroundings. What appeared to be an industrial warehouse greeted us with old, unkempt shelves and machinery littering the large room. As we walked towards the middle, a single, dark hallway led out of the room. Several open rooms that appeared to be darker than the already darkened hallway could be seen down the hall. The 5 of us looked at each other in confusion, hoping at least one of us would say something about our current situation. Let's split up, Luke said, breaking the silence. We all glared back at him for his terrible idea. His sideways grin showed us he was kidding. Yeah, we can do more damage that way, Evan said with a chuckle. Taylor let out a giggle as well as we quickly picked up on the movie he was referencing. Our short burst of humor was short-lived, however, as we began focusing yet again on our current problem. As we browsed the decrepit machinery and tools, a loud crashing sound echoed through the hallway. It was very distant, but loud. The 5 of us quickly gathered at the entrance to the hallway to investigate the noise. Hey, guys? Taylor whispered behind us. Almost simultaneously, we all looked back at Taylor to observe him pointing to the corner of the room. Another red light appeared, yet smaller. As we approached the mysterious light, we found out quickly what it was. A security camera was aimed towards the middle of the room. A quick glance around showed several more cameras. What the hell? David said with his mouth dropped. Dude, are these the stalkers that note mentioned? They're freaking watching us, man. Evan said with his voice raised with each word. Well, let's change that, David said with authority. Let's get the hell out of here. David began walking towards the hallway to move down and we followed suit. As we walked, the shadows from the dim lights created an almost web-like sight from the protective cages the bulbs were housed in. Aimlessly we wandered as we passed room after room that seemed to be filled with the same industrial machinery and equipment. This place was larger than we first gave it credit for. A dead end. We'd reached the end of the hallway with no way out. A small note was posted in the middle of the wall. We all stared at each other blankly, as we knew what this was. It took a few seconds for one of us to build up the courage to grab the note. To all of our surprise, that person was Taylor. Taking the note off the wall, he began slowly turning to us as he read it. In the room of steam, The doorway lies, but don't scream. Soon, you'll meet your team. The hell does that mean? Luke snorted. Dude, this is obviously some sort of industrial plant. There has to be like a boiler room, or steam room, or something like that. Look, it said, the room of steam. We have to find this room, it's our only clue. David said, trying to show a bit of authority. Luke raised his eyebrows and held his head towards the hallway, as if to sarcastically say, lead the way, boss. We checked 4 rooms before we finally found it. 2 large boilers were on each side of us, in a pincer. Directly in front of them were dirty, powered-down turbines. A large shutter door was in front of us, and the first sign of hope since leaving that tiny, dark room. A familiar sight met us, as, at the right of the door, was a power box identical to the one we saw earlier, only the red light was off. We approached the power box to figure out a way to feed it power and get the hell out of here. It's gotta be one of these. Luke said confidently, pointing to 2 levers next to the box, one crudely painted green and one painted red. Hold up, I said quickly as I pulled yet another note from the side of the box. Right where this note lies, you'll be in for a surprise. Green brings you allies, I read, attempting that same poetic tone. What allies? Taylor said from behind David's back. I don't know, man. David replied, shrugging his shoulders. It's another stupid riddle like that steam room crap, Luke yelled. It's obvious we have to pull the green lever to get out. Whoever thought of this crap must think they've built a little escape room and watch us as we figure out his stupid little poems. Luke motioned his head towards the corner of the room and waved to a camera. Luke looked at me as if holding the note gave me the authority to decide. I mean, yeah, pull the green lever, I said, rolling my eyes. With a smirk, Luke pulled the green lever. A loud clunk sound was heard behind the wall, followed by the sounds of machinery. Luke looked towards me with a proud smile. Slowly, his smile began to fall as the machinery continued its loud clunks and squeals. He began uttering low, croaky groans as he began to look down. We all did the same. Evan screamed as we saw a long metal post had shot through Luke's midsection. Luke and I made eye contact as we slowly lifted our heads back up. Slowly, his face became blank as he slumped down, hanging from the post that was jutting out of the wall. Help him! Help him! Evan commanded in terror. It had penetrated deep into his midsection as it took all 4 of us to slowly pull him from the post. We gently laid him on the ground and began yelling his name to attempt and keep him awake. It was too late. He was dead. I looked back at the post, which was sloppily carved into a point. Taylor's newfound confidence seemed to vanish as I heard him begin to cry behind me. In rage, David grabbed the note from my hand and glared at the scribbled writing. Oh my God, he said softly. We didn't solve the riddle. What do you mean? Evan asked. The note says, right where this note lies, the note lied to us. David stated with his authoritative tone now gone. I grabbed the notes out of David's hands and crumpled it, throwing it to the ground. I hastily stood up and, with an angry pull, I pulled the red lever. More clunks and squeals emanated from the wall again. David moved to grab me and get me out of harm's way. I confidently put one finger up, telling him to wait. The shutters began opening. Evan let out a sigh of relief as David hurriedly ducked under the door, not wanting to wait for it to fully open. No, dude, no, Evan cried in defeat. Another shutter door. We were now in a small room with another door in front of us. We looked around. No power box, no notes. Guys? Hey, guys. Taylor yelled as he pressed his ear against the closed door. I hear voices. We all copied Taylor's posture as we pressed our ears against the cold, dirty door. He was right. Voices were heard from the other side. They were all female and seemed to be arguing with each other. The words were indiscernible, but they were clearly frightened in their tones. Hey, whoever is out there, open the door, Evan commanded. A high-pitched scream was heard on the other side while Evan made his orders. Who's that? A feminine voice yelled from the other side. We're trapped in here. Help us, please. Evan continued his frantic cries for help. Hold on. Give us a second. The same female voice yelled in a way that we could tell she was cupping her mouth to the door so we could hear better. Several minutes passed with more arguing heard from the other side. More machinery noises emitted from the wall next to the door. Very familiar voices. I looked at David, who had his hand over his mouth, not knowing what was about to happen. Slowly, the shutter began to rise. As the door opened, 5 women began to appear, and among them was Jen, my wife. In an almost romance novel type of way, we leapt towards each other and hugged each other tightly. "Oh my gosh," she yelled into my shoulder. "What is going on?" "I don't know," I said softly, "but we're getting out of here. Now." It was then that I turned to look at the others. The other guys I had been trying to escape with were embraced in similar fashion with one of the women. We all seemed to notice the scene at the same time. "They're taking couples," David said. "Whoever is doing this took." David stopped his explanation and peered towards the shuttered door us guys had come from. One of the women, the oldest of the bunch, was standing over Luke's body, hands over her mouth. David walked towards her and put his hand on her shoulder. He knew who the lady was. "Don't touch me," she yelled as she jerked away and began backing up. "What did you do to him?" she yelled, pointing at David. "Whoa, I didn't do anything. Whoever is doing this set up a damn riddle to solve. We chose wrong and something came out of the wall stabbing him," David retorted, putting both his hands up. The woman fell to the ground crying. "He was my husband. Luke. No, Luke." She continued cupping her face to hide the tears. David knelt down next to her, once again putting his hand on her shoulder. "I'm very, very, very sorry for your loss. I believe we're all in the same danger, though. Will you help us escape?" He said as gently as he could. It was obvious who was going to lead us out of this. From there on, we followed David as he was the only one with a clear mind to take control. A loud buzzing noise was heard again, paired with both of the open shutter doors falling closed with a loud slam. Several of us screamed at the startling event. We were stuck. Again. Or at least we briefly thought. Scraping noises began to fill the tiny room from one section of the wall. The wall was moving. It was a false door, and what showed itself as soon as it cleared was a regular door. The reason I say regular is because it wasn't a shutter door, not some industrial strength door with an electric box. It was a simple door with a doorknob. One of the women began walking angrily to the door. "Kaylee," another woman shouted, holding her hand out. Kaylee opened the door, peeked in, turned her head to us, and beckoned us to follow. We did. We stood in awe as we had now entered a large circular room. No doors, no hallways, nothing but what seemed like metal walls surrounding us. Several more cameras hung up on the walls, making sure to catch every move we make. A small table sat in the middle of the room with a light beaming down on it, as if to show us something. That something was another note sitting in the middle of the table. Jen darted towards the table as I hastily followed her. Snatching the note, quickly she began reading. Footprints lined the wall. Go stand, turning to watch all. Face, who made you fall. These riddles are getting so old. Kaylee groaned as she slumped her shoulders. Wait, you were given riddles too? Taylor asked with a confused look. Yeah, we had to solve some weird code disguised in an annoying math problem to open that door where we found you at. One of the other girls said, "Hey everyone, look," Evan shouted from across the room. He pointed towards the ground. A pair of crudely painted footprints had been painted on the ground directly in front of the wall. A quick look around the room showed many more lining the walls. Footprints line the walls, David said. Go stand, turning to watch all. They want us to stand on the footprints, obviously. But what about the last part? Face who made you fall? Kaylee asked with a worried scowl. Fall in love. David yelled, lifting his head from the note. We're couples. They want us to directly face the one that made us fall. In love, right? That's gotta be right. Sounds good to me. Jen interjected as she slapped the paper back on the table. We stood, facing each other with our backs against the wall, desperately making sure our feet were lined up perfectly with the terrible attempt at a footprint. I panned the room watching each person make eye contact with their significant other. A sad sight was seen as the older lady stared at a blank wall on the other side of the room, where Luke should have been. I looked up at Jen, whose eyes met mine. She gave me a heartwarming smile. That smile dropped quickly as more machinery began to work in the walls. We'd solved the riddle. I looked at Jen, who was shaking her head. The ground began moving underneath me as the floor began lifting up. I felt a sense of weightlessness as the wall behind me opened up. Another false wall. I tried to steady myself as the door pushed me into the now open wall. I rolled on my back, landing with a thud. I looked up as the false door reclosed itself. A quick glimpse around showed metal passageways that split off in several different directions. It was clearly built with a less than sturdy material than the previous rooms. Metal and aluminum walls led me in several directions as I began walking, picking my turns at random. This was a maze someone had crudely built. We were all stuck in it. I screamed in shock as I turned a corner, bumping into someone who fell on their butt from the impact. "Damn you," Kaylee said from her now sitting position. "Come on, get up. We need to find the others," I said, offering her my hand. I helped her up, and we began walking. A short time later, that same familiar sight greeted us down one particular passageway. An electric box with a red light on it was next to a door. A note hung from the box. Kaylee let out a sigh and ripped the note from the box. "The hungry mouth hides. Circles have this many sides. Choose wrong and it slides." That's like one of those stupid kitty jokes. Kaylee yelped, frustrated. "Yeah, but do you know the answer?" I asked. "No, but it told us to choose. How do we..." She paused, looking above the door. 5 chains hung above the door. All 5 chains had a hook attached to the bottom. A closer inspection showed each hook had a number on it. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 were painted on each hook with that same red and green paint alternating with each number. "Okay then, there's your answer," I said mockingly. "Well, there's only one answer, right? I mean, a circle has no sides," she said with a bit of fright in her voice at the realization we had to choose soon. "It definitely has no sides, but those riddles have tricked us before in the way it's worded," I replied, running my hand through my hair, pondering what to do. "You're right. It definitely isn't 0. You know what? It's 1, she said, pointing her finger up. "How do you know that?" I said, raising my eyebrow. "It doesn't have any corners like a square. Therefore, it only has one side," she said, once again confident in her statement. "That actually makes sense," I said, attempting a smile. Kaylee grasped her hand around the hook labeled 1. She gazed towards me and let in a heavy inhale as she pulled the chain. It was as if she'd disappeared right before my eyes as she dropped. Screams of pain were heard as I looked down. A trapdoor had slid open underneath her. She had dropped into a small pit. At the bottom was a steel grinder. I watched as the blunt metal teeth of the grinder slowly ate Kaylee as she was seemingly devoured by the giant machine. This maze claimed another victim. The door slowly slid shut. I placed my hand on my forehead as I thought of the answer. It was indeed a riddle I had heard as a child. How many sides does a circle have? 2. The outside and the inside. I grabbed the chain labeled 2. I pulled in. Another buzz was heard, followed by a click. The door opened slightly. I pushed the door open and walked through. More of this metal and aluminum maze continued as I took turn after turn. More and more of those security cameras littered the walls, watching my every movement. A shadowy figure appeared at the end of the corridor. "Hey," I yelled. The figure moved towards me. It was Taylor. I could tell he had been crying as his cheeks were puffed up and eyes red. "Are you alright, man?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm just scared," he said quietly. "There can't be too many doors left. I just solved a riddle on one that led me here. Let's find another one," I said, not wanting to mention what had just happened to Kaylee. He nodded his head and we proceeded. After several minutes of walking through more and more corridors, taking more and more random turns, we found another large shutter door. "That has to be it, dude," Taylor said with a whimper. A big shutter door let us in here. It has to lead us out, right? I guess, man. I don't know. I replied as I studied the door. Again, a note was stuck to a powered down box. Taylor walked towards it and excitedly grabbed the note. 2 rooms left and right. One with bees is quite right. Choose wrong, you're squeezed tight. We looked on either end of the room. 2 smaller rooms were indeed left and right of us. We approached the one on the left and attempted to peer into the small window we were only able to see through standing on our toes. It was empty. Wait, I hear something. Taylor whispered as he pressed his ear against the door. He looked up at me with a look of confusion. I hear buzzing noises, like flies or... He stopped momentarily to make eye contact with me. Bees. He continued with a frown. But the note said the one with the bees is quite right. That has to be it, I said, yet again attempting to keep command. No, man. It says if you choose wrong, you will be squeezed tight. I'm allergic to bee stings. I once got stung and my face puffed up to where I couldn't see. That must be what it meant, right? He answered, picking up speed as his sentences moved on. I lifted my hands up on either side in confusion. We looked towards the other room and tried to peer into a similar small window. Since I was the taller of the 2, I gazed in. Another empty room except the wall was littered with red and green paint. All letter B's. I smiled and looked down at Taylor. The letter B. The walls are covered with it, I said, shaking my head. Seriously? He said as he looked up at the security camera, watching us solve another riddle. The room had a sliding door. Taylor opened it and walked in. I blinked in a startle as the door slammed shut as soon as he entered. I tried to open the door again, yelling Taylor's name. I could hear him inside, but couldn't tell what he was yelling. I once again ran back to the window to peek in. Taylor was panicking as we both seemed to hear more mechanical noises start up. Taylor's panic turned to utter shock as we both witnessed the metal walls closing in on him. This was a compressor and it was activated. I watched the 3rd victim succumb to this cursed maze. Taylor was crushed in the compressor. I walked towards the other small room. I opened the sliding door to hear the sound of louder buzzing. No bees. I looked towards the ceiling. Another security camera with a speaker. There were 4 speakers on each side of the room making the buzzing sounds. Almost as soon as I entered, the buzzing stopped. The sliding door closed behind me as I heard mechanical noises start up yet again. I quickly ran to the door. It opened. I darted out of the room to see the shutter door slowly opening. I ducked underneath and was met by another shutter door. Not all was as it seemed though. While looking at another door, to my left was a chain link fence with a gate door. I was free of this maze. The night sky was a warming sight as I gazed at the stars. More mechanical noises were heard. I looked down as I realized the second shutter door was opening. Did more people make it? As the door slowly opened, I saw feet. I recognized those shoes immediately. They were Jen's shoes. I smiled in delight as she walked from the building. It was then that I looked down to see Jen dragging the bloody body of Evan. A serrated knife was clutched in her other hand. She smiled at me menacingly. He solved the last puzzle. I kinda just reacted. I couldn't let him get away, she said coldly. I stared into her cold eyes. She was delighted in her actions. She continued, I got 5 of them. That older lady almost caught me and asked if I was trying to get her killed by answering wrong. I mean, I was, but she fell back in line after a few quick misdirections. I was more clever, she said with a huge grin. My thoughts went back to that first poem where the Stalkers said they were more clever. They were indeed. Damn you, I yelled in frustration. I only got 3. One was stabbed in the gut, one fed to the grinder, and one smashed in the compressor. I looked up at the camera pointing at us with that red light. 5-3. I'll beat her next time, I said to the camera with a grin. Another sleepless night had arrived as I stared blankly into my computer monitor. I lazily browsed through gaming streams, YouTube videos, and funny memes. Insomnia hit me hard tonight as I tried desperately to relax my mind but found myself caught up in the endless digital world called the internet. An unexpected sight was seen from the corner of my eye. The small LED light on my phone was blinking, indicating I had a notification. What kind of notification could I be receiving this deep into the night? I grabbed my phone and lit up the screen. One missed call. Strange. I didn't hear a thing. This late, I usually have it on vibrate, but with it sitting on my desk, I usually could not only hear it, but feel it through the vibrations resonating through my desktop. I was confused, but dialed the number back. The call rang several times as I patiently waited for an answer. Just as I figured it was going to go to voicemail, a clicking sound was heard.
Hello?
A female voice groggily answered on the other end. Oh, hi, I awkwardly replied. I'm sorry if I'm bugging you, but I just got a missed call from your phone number.
I'm sorry, hun, but that can't be right. I'm asleep in bed and nowhere near my phone.
She replied sluggishly as I clearly woke her up. I began to feel bad that I had woken up this poor elderly woman. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, ma'am. Maybe it was just a weird hiccup with my phone. I apologize, I said, placing my hand on my forehead in embarrassment.
Quite alright, sweetie. Have a good night.
She said in a light-hearted tone. We said our goodbyes, and I was a tad relieved she wasn't too terribly upset with me. Still, I was a bit embarrassed. I continued my internet love affair, and all but put the awkward call out of my mind when another indicator light flashed on my phone. One missed call. What the hell? I whispered to myself. Confusion hit me as I clicked on the notification. It was the same number I had missed earlier from the elderly lady's phone. I pondered if I should call back. Maybe she figured out what happened and wanted to let me know. I called back.
Hello?
A familiar voice said, a little more sternly this time. I'm sorry, ma'am. I just got another missed call from you. Did you try calling me back? I said, trying to sound as innocent as possible as to not frighten this poor woman.
My dear, I have not touched my phone since we last spoke. Now, please, I have a very early day tomorrow and really need my rest.
She sternly replied. Again, I apologize. Good night, ma'am, I replied, once again placing my hand on my forehead. The sight hit me once more. Several minutes passed and another indicator light on my phone was blinking at me, almost mocking me. One missed call. It was the same number again. I let out a sigh and put my phone back on the desk. This time, I turned my ringtone on to see if I could hear it next time. I did. A quick beep was heard, followed by silence. 2 missed calls. I stared at my phone waiting for another call. A few more minutes passed as I stared with my finger close to the screen, ready to pounce on the next call. My reflexes kicked in as the phone lit up with the same number calling me. Hello? I quickly answered. Shuffling was heard in the background as I repeated my greeting twice more. Nothing. Her phone must be dialing on its own, like some sort of glitch. I hung up. Almost as soon as I hung up, it began ringing again. I quickly answered. Hey, hello? Ma'am, can you hear me? Your phone is... I was interrupted by another sound. At what I could only imagine was the other end of the room. I heard the snores of who I assume was the elderly lady, but closer to the phone. I heard a voice.
Mine, you belong to me. No more pain. Your pain is almost over. The pain of life. You will thank me.
A raspy, deep voice was heard saying, Whoa, who is this? I yelled into the phone. No answer. A small laugh was heard from the same voice. I began to panic. Something was in this old lady's house. Was this man calling me to hear whatever he was planning? I hung up and moved to call the police. Mid-dial, my phone lit up with the same number. I answered. Again. The same man's ramblings were heard. More of the same, about life and pain. The person was clearly troubled. I opened my mouth to speak, but was interrupted by another voice. This voice, however, had a much different inflection.
4, 2, 6, 7.
A soft, feminine voice said quietly. The voice was almost seductive as she spoke. Wait, what? Who are you? 4267. What is this? I asked in a panic. Click. The call hung up again. 4267. What was the voice trying to tell me? Was that another prisoner of this psychotic man? As if on cue, my phone once again awoke. With the same number staring back from the screen, I answered. More of this disturbed man's whispering rants could be heard only. They were further away and barely audible. He was moving towards the elderly woman. I began to panic at the realization.
The street.
A soft, feminine voice was heard again. What? I asked, confused.
The street of hope.
She slowly replied. I don't know what you're... I stopped what I was saying as I realized what this could mean. The call ended on my phone as I couldn't believe what it was implying. The Street of Hope, 1 block away from my house, was Hope Street. A quick glimpse on my map program showed me the address, 4267 Hope Street. I was close. I picked up my phone, but this time, I was not calling the elderly woman's number back. I was phoning the police. After trying to make my story as believable as possible, blaming it on a butt dial, I managed to get them to head to her house. Sirens and flashing lights were soon heard from the neighborhood across the way. I couldn't see what was happening, just the blue and red lights. An hour later, there was a knocking at my door. It was the police. In conducting a search of her house, the police were able to apprehend a mentally unstable man who had just escaped from a local psychiatric hospital. He was branding a small steak knife from the woman's kitchen. My mind raced as I remembered the other person in the house who gave me the address. They were confused as only the deranged man and elderly woman were found in the house. They did find her cell phone on the other end of the room, though, from where the elderly woman was sleeping. When the police searched her phone to verify my story, there was an unsent text. A text that was being sent to my number. The text simply read, "It's not time yet." My cousin Myra is afraid of mirrors. Like, in abnormal and persistent ways. When we were little, she would insist on taking down the mirror in my room when she's sleeping over. Whenever she had to go to the bathroom, she'll ask me to accompany and shield her eyes from seeing the mirror. When she was a kid, this wasn't that much of a problem. All of us thought that as she grew up, she'll eventually overcome her unreasonable fear, but she has only gotten worse. It appears that Myra suffers from a severe case of spectrophobia. She would feel uneasy, at first, when she is within close proximity of a mirror. After a little while, she would become extremely anxious. If left unattended, and if she couldn't run away from the room, she would start getting hysterical. I didn't understand whatever it is that made her so afraid of them, but the look in her eyes when she saw one is rather chilling. When I was around 14, Myra and I went to the same school. We were hanging out at my place one day, and by then, our family has made some sort of special protocol and preparation just in case she came around. We would put some sort of foldable cover on every mirror in the house. When she's around, I would go from room to room to cover the mirrors. That day, I did not yet understand how frightful this whole ordeal is to her. Like the dumb kid that I was, I thought it'd be funny to scare her a bit. I was, of course, horribly wrong. We arrived at my home after school, and I immediately went in to cover the mirrors while Myra waited in the living room. I planned on locking her alone in my room. I removed the cover and hid it somewhere she wouldn't find it. I mean, if she's that scared, she could just cover the mirror with my bedsheet or something. "Myra, I've covered them up. You can come up here if you want. I'll be in the bathroom for a bit." I called out to her from the second floor. "Okay." Myra rushed towards my room. I hid behind the bathroom door, and when I saw her step inside my room, I closed the door from behind her and locked it. I let out a giggle as I could hear her panicking inside. "No, please, let me out." I could hear her sobbing on the other side of the door. Shortly after, she began banging on the door, screaming hysterically, and the sheer terror in her voice left me frozen. "Please, let me out. Don't let them get me, please. I beg you, let me out. Please let me out. Don't let them take me. I was shocked beyond belief. I had seen her get scared by mirrors before, but this is entirely different. Suddenly, a loud bang at the door brought me back to my senses. It dawned on me that this sick joke of mine is a lot more dangerous than I thought. I quickly unlocked the door. Myra was nowhere to be seen. Her bag was laid on the ground, its contents scattered around the room, and it seems like the bag itself was ripped apart by something. I looked towards the mirror on my wall and saw what seems like a distorted reflection of my room. For a short time, I could see shadowy figures lurking on the reflection. Their bodies distorted unnaturally, and their limbs are disturbingly long. The way the creatures move around is as if they do not know that their body was supposed to move. It was jarring and terrible. Among those creatures, I saw Myra, dragged away by one of them, her mouth covered by one of the creature's hands. I rushed towards the mirror and trying to get inside and take her away from whatever these creatures are. I remember I was yelling, cursing, crying, and hitting my mirror repeatedly looking for a way to get in. It was no use. The distorted reflection of my room turned normal again. I fell on my knees. I didn't really understand what happened, but I knew that whatever chance I had to enter that dimension was gone. I gazed upon my reflection only to notice that someone is behind me. It was Myra. I turned around as quick as I could and hugged her, sobbing on her shoulders. That's when I noticed something odd about her. She felt cold. I pulled away from her and I saw her standing there smiling from ear to ear. Her eyes were glued on me, wide open in a way that I had never seen her do before. It was as if something had taken over her body, and not exactly knowing how to make an expression. Whoever this person is, it's not the Myra I grew up with. What are you standing around for? She asked, with her uncanny expression attached on her face. What the hell are you? What have you done to her? I asked nervously. I'm not sure why, but I could sense malicious intent from her. She walked towards me and I backed away, instinctively trying my best to avoid the mirror too. Suddenly, I heard that my parents had arrived home. She stopped and quickly ran downstairs and greeted them cheerfully. Her expression seemed normal. I felt like I had just lost my mind. My parents seemed rather pleasantly surprised to be greeted by Myra like that. She was always kind of gloomy and quiet. My parents must have thought we were having a great time at school or something. I couldn't say a word to my parents about what had happened earlier. This creature was acting normally in front of my parents. At some point, even I was convinced that this girl was indeed Myra. She had dinner together with my family, and the whole time I felt increasingly disturbed by the sight of this thing. No one seemed to realize that something was off about her. Soon after, her parents arrived to pick her up. She said her farewell to my parents, and before she goes, she leaned closer to me and whispered, "You're next." I remember standing there, frozen in fear. I realized I have unleashed something into this world who's pretending to be my cousin. I was too scared to say a word and quickly ran back to my room. I took down my mirror and covered it, making sure whatever is in there can't get me. I lay awake in bed till morning. The next day, terrible news arrived at my door. Myra's entire family was killed when their house caught on fire the previous night. Her body was never found. The police suspect that she was obliterated by the fire, but I know what's really going on. It has been 5 years since that incident. That thing impersonating my cousin is still out there somewhere. She has not come for me yet, but I know that I'll be seeing her sooner or later. All I can do is stay away from the mirrors. A little bit of background context for you all. I'm a 27-year-old male and I've been caving pretty much since I was 17. I'm no expert, but I enjoy the sport and the exploration. Where some might find shuffling through cramped spaces and near pitch black save for a head torch horrific, I find it exhilarating. Recently, my friend Mark, a fellow caver and my best friend from college, came to me to tell me of a cave nearby that he'd seen whilst exploring another cave. It looked interesting to say the least. So yesterday we packed up all our gear and drove to it, 50 miles up into the mountains. When we arrived, I noticed what had caught Mark's eye about it. The entrance showed that the cave traveled steeply upwards, almost vertically, a wide enough space for both of us to climb up side by side, rather than one behind the other. We quickly got to work attaching harnesses and preparing to ascend up the interior, when we noticed little carved out ledges in the cave wall, going upwards like a stepladder of sorts. This truly piqued our curiosity, and we began to ascend using the carved out steps for guidance. That was all fine until around 10 steps up, I noticed a folded wedge of paper stuffed into one of the ledges. After convincing Mark to turn back down so we could read them, I began to recant the writings of what may be a madman, or something far more horrifyingly real. It was a 4-page letter, with writing scrawled all over it, dampened from its time in the cave. Regardless, it stopped us from exploring. Below I have typed out word for word what was written on the pages. Make of it what you will, but it is disturbing nonetheless. Dear to whomever it may concern. I think that's the phrase anyway. I must warn you of the dangers you are about to encounter. I beg of you, do not ascend the steps. You are in grave danger. Turn away now. Turn away now before it smells you. I'll tell you my story. If you find it hard to validate my warning, be warned. It would be best to stop reading altogether and turn home now. However, I know many of you will be too stubborn to heed my warnings. Thus, I must recount the series of events leading up to the terrible fate of myself and many others. The year is 2193. Humanity has almost been wiped out, save for some small-knit communities that have managed to preserve themselves. I belong to one of those communities. We are not advised to leave the commune, but, of course, teenagers and young adults such as myself live to tickle our curiosity, so we explored the mountains. The journey to the mountains is very dangerous. There are pools of chemical waste and barren, sunken lands that collapse underneath your feet should you take the wrong step. My friends and I are clever though, and have been raised on the broken earth to be wary of such dangers. The journey was perilous, but not for us. We were a group of 6, myself, female, with another female and 4 males. Our ages ranged from 14 to 21. The cave view, my dear, unsuspecting reader, are currently standing in was the last thing we ever got to explore. Our young, unfulfilled lives snuffed out by making the mistake of satisfying our thirst for adventure. Once again, I will tell you firmly, get out of here if you want to live happily. When we finally arrived at the cave, we noticed its ascending tunnel was carved into with little steps, ledges for our feet and hands to help us climb up the near sheer wall. We ascended them. My friends were so excited, chattering with joy as we grew closer and closer to the top of the tunnel, approaching a wide ledge that led to flat ground for us to walk on. I, however, grew increasingly nervous. There was something not quite right sitting in the pit of my stomach. I would later learn that this was the primitive instinct of feeling preyed upon. As we got to the top of the ledge, we found a wide cavern filled with light, the light source of which was unknown. The moment I saw light, I felt pure fear. But I proceeded onwards anyway. As we moved into the cavern, we saw the impossible. It was a large arena-sized circular room, filled with different segments of themed spaces. To elaborate, imagine cutting an orange in half. You see each equal-sized segment sitting next to each other, with a line of piths separating each segment from the next. Well, this was like the setup of the room. Each segment had a different theme to it, separated from the next by a different color of paint on the cave walls. For example, one segment was Word Atlas themed, with a large globe on a stand sitting in the middle of the segment, with the walls painted blue. Another segment was Dolls themed. The walls painted a pastel pink, with a mound of pin-cushion dollies piled in the center. As my friends stared in awe, I began to feel increasingly nauseous, and told my friends I had to go back down the tunnel and outside for some fresh air. Timothy, a boy in our group who I knew had a certain fondness of me, offered to come outside with me. My friends announced that, after a bit more exploration, they would come back down to tell us what they found. We then parted ways. Exiting the cave, Timothy descended the steps first, supporting me as I descended after him. Just as we got near the bottom, however, I felt something truly chilling. The movement of air, just millimeters above my scalp. I recognized it instantly as the swooping motion of a hand, swinging to grab at the hair on my head. I squealed and fell back, bringing Timothy down with me too. I quickly clambered back up and ran out of the cave entrance. Timothy on my heels asking me what had startled me so much. I explained to him what happened, and he simply brushed it off as nerves, which comforted me in some respects, but also annoyed me slightly that he wouldn't take my words seriously. No more than 10 minutes after we had reached the exterior of the cave, did the rest of my friends join us. All 4 of them, smiling gleefully about their findings. It unnerved me greatly. They explained how, at the other end of the cavern, there was a small door just wide enough for them all to crawl through on their hands and knees. It was a little red door, hidden behind a large teddy bear that made the red segment of the room teddy bear themed. On the other side of this door was a living room. It was immaculately clean, apparently, with sofas made out of white satin, and even contained something known as a television, a historic artifact that allowed pre-Great War humans to enjoy worldwide entertainment on a broadcast screen. There were other rooms too, a kitchen with a refrigerator full of delights, such as a large chocolate fudge cake, fresh fruit, a rarity in these times, steaks, a lot. There were bedrooms with fresh bedding, and bathrooms with bathing tubs large enough to fit all 6 of us in, should we want. I began to wonder how they could have found all of that in under 15 minutes. I reasoned that the adrenaline from exploring such a fantastical thing must have rushed them. I was so wrong. So wrong. As they described the house in the cave, their grins grew wider and wider, unnervingly so. They were so happy to have found this place, so very happy. They urged me to come look, begging me to join them in the fun. I firmly said no. Something was not right about that place. Nothing in the history books we had discovered ever told us of caves that contained rooms and fresh blood. It wasn't normal, nor natural for a cave to be kept like a home. I told them I would be staying outside. I would wait for them here. Timothy stated he'd keep me company. The last image in my mind of all my friends alive was of them all ascending up the ledges, eyes wide and unblinking, still smiling. We waited for them for almost 10 hours. At least, I had thought it was 10 hours. I couldn't tell, as my clock piece had frozen in place by the time we entered the cave. As it grew darker and darker and the sun set over the land, we heard shuffling down the cave tunnel. I froze and Timothy turned to look. He greeted whoever it was, and only one of our friends could be seen. The rest had not followed him. It was the oldest of our group, Harrison, who was stood at the bottom of the tunnel, breathing heavily and erratically. With a hoarse voice, he screeched, "Run!" and bolted towards us and away down the paths leading back to our home. Without hesitating, we followed in pursuit. I knew in that moment that I couldn't look behind me, that if I did, I would see whatever hellish creature nearly grabbed me hours earlier. We did not stop running until we arrived back at the commune. I felt as though my lungs might collapse, and we fell into a nearby park space to rest. Harrison had tears streaming down his cheeks, his eyes fixed and unwavering. His face was disheveled. Hairs grew on his chin and neck, his hair longer and ragged. He had large purple circles around his eyes, showing a dangerous lack of sleep. He described what had happened to the others. He stated that they had been in the cave for 3 weeks at least, but he had no idea how long it had actually been, as there were no clocks in the rooms, and his clock piece had stopped working. At first, they were extremely content. The food was delicious, and they had fresh running water. The television device played old-fashioned pictures that spoke and moved, and sometimes played music that they had never heard of. At one point, they had all unanimously decided that they would never leave. Their memories of their lives outside of the cave started to fade, and all they could feel was overwhelming happiness. That was until one morning when Harrison woke up and everything was different. The painted pastel walls were no more. Instead, red blood smeared the cave. The bathing tub was a basin full of rotting meat, and the air that once smelt fresh and clean was bloodied and deceased, and sulfur filled his nose and throat until he vomited. As he screamed for the others, he noticed the television screen was just a sheet of human skin that had been stretched and pinned over the wall. The foods in the refrigerator were rotting piles of brain and bone, but most disturbingly of all, our friends, his companions for what felt like the past 3 weeks were mere skeletons sat at the kitchen table. He had been talking to corpses for at least the past few days now, and that's when he heard it. The slithering of skin on rock, the clacking of claws on the wall, the sickening dragging of a limp body that had adapted to live in the shadows for centuries. He turned, and he saw it. On the cave ceiling was a humanoid figure, sickly cream-colored with skin loosely covering disjointed limbs that clasped to the rock. Its fingers were long and spindly, covered in brown, dried blood. Its eyes had no lids, nor irises, and were bloodshot red, with black pupils resting in the center. It had no nose, but a wide, horrific grin that stretched over sharp, uneven black teeth. It scuttled slightly above him, red saliva dripping into his face. It said to him, "Do you like my home? I made it just for you." Harrison then ran out and almost leapt down the tunnel. The whole time he could hear the thing scuttling after him. After telling us the story, he vomited. We took him home, and then told the authority group about our missing friends and our experiences. They said they'd have a look at the cave for us. We were not reprimanded by our parents, but they did inform us that it would be inappropriate to continue talking about the cave. For many nights after that day, I had been plagued with night terrors, dreams of waking up in the cave rooms, dreams of waking up to the realization that what I thought was reality in the commune was simply a hallucination caused by the creature in the cave. Dreams that the creature was stood over me, waiting for me to sleep. A week had gone by when the commune May Day celebrations took place. I was depressed. I couldn't eat nor sleep. Harrison hadn't left his home once, and Timothy was in the same state as myself, unable to sleep from the fearful night terrors that made him restless. I couldn't stand it. Everyone in the commune knew what happened to us. They had done nothing. Even my deceased friends' parents were smiling and laughing like buffoons when the bones of their children had been picked clean by some mutant. The next thing I knew, I screamed. I stood up and screamed at the adults, the authority group. I asked them how they could be so gleeful when there were dead children at unrest in the cave. That's when the authority group took me away. I was strapped to a chair. They told me I was suffering hysteria, and the land outside the commune had high levels of ammonia that caused myself and my friends to hallucinate. It had caused permanent brain damage. I was suffering from fits, and my mind had convinced myself that I was simply imagining things. I had made it all up on some chemical high with my friends. They had simply been unable to make it back to the commune. It was a perilous journey, after all. Until tonight, I've spent every minute in my home trying to make sense of all the events that had led up to now. Had I really been hallucinating? My entire concept of reality was skewed. It was so vivid to me. The caves, the journey, the fear in Harrison's face, the fact that my clock piece had stopped working. My clock piece had stopped working. I jumped out of my bed and began to write this all down in a letter for you, dear reader. The point of this all, my clock piece had stopped working. So had Harrison's as he entered the cave. And now I realize with ultimate fear in my heart that none of the clocks in my town work either. As I am writing this down, I feel a familiar sense of dread. In the corner of my eye, blood is smeared on my walls. My walls are no longer wooden, but rock. I feel sick. I feel sick. My clock piece has stopped working. I feel sick. No, this rambling goes on for a whole page. I'm going back to the cave. I am no longer in my world. I am not home. This is not home. I pray you turn back as I have told you to. Time does not exist. Everything is hell. It wants you to come. I don't know whether reality is actually what it has revealed to me, or if reality is on the other side of the cave. I do not know what reality is. I do not know what time is. It has altered my reality. I'm going back to the cave to ask if I can pretend again. I want to go and pretend that reality isn't this. I don't know if reality is that I am suffering hallucinations from brain damage, or if reality is the hallucinations itself, or if it is neither. I do not know anymore. But before I go, I will leave you this letter. If you want to continue to explore, be my guest. I cannot stop you, as I have handed my fate over to it. Time does not exist. Reality is altered. If you enter, The world you exist in now will not be the same world as when you exit, should it let you exit. The decision is yours, dear reader. Would you rather be ignorant and happy, unaware of your slow demise, or would you try to find the truth of the cave-dwelling monstrosity, but be conscious of every dreadful thing that surrounds you? Signed, Ophelia. Safe to say, Mark and I decided not to explore the cave that day. I personally didn't feel there was anything wrong with the cave, although the letter did disturb me a bit. I didn't feel like climbing up the ledges to find a dead body or something of a crazy person laying on the top. But something has stuck with me. This concept of reality being altered. The idea that what we think we are seeing is just some huge lie. Freaky, right? I can't really make sense of the letter. It feels like the unfinished premise to a Stephen King fantasy horror novel. Regardless, I don't want to explore the cave to find out if it's true or not. By the way, does anyone know what time Chicago Fire comes on tonight on NBC? My TV isn't displaying the time right now. I'm a very anxious person. The kind of person who is the living embodiment of Murphy's Law. And I am terrified by every little thing. I hate the dark. Crowds scare me. Strangers are my worst enemy. And the list just keeps going on. What makes all of this worse is that I have a history of night terrors, starting when I was really little. I guess it didn't help that my family made fun of me for my little nightmares, and would absolutely encourage my worst fears to come to life, often just by poking at me or standing in my room while I tried to sleep. Just like my general fears, I have a list of reoccurring night terrors. One of the terrors that started when I was young and just expanded to my adulthood is that of a tall, headless man that would stand over me while I slept. He's the reason why I can't sleep facing the edge of my bed. There was also a small child that joined the tall man for a while, but that was the result of my mom thinking it was funny to stand over me while I slept. She stopped when I yelled at her, and soon after the child left, leaving only the man. Then I have the usual Hispanic fears, like the yo-ho, which occasionally floats around my room, and the hairy hand, which got worse when I outgrew my bed, and had to sleep with my feet almost dangling off the edge of my bed. One that I thought had disappeared was the man who hung from a noose outside my bedroom window, and I was so goddamn sure he was gone because I moved from my parents' house to my own. I thought the only terror that had stuck with me was the tall, headless man who I saw regularly, almost like that old high school friend that no one likes. But 2 nights ago, I heard something moving around outside my window. I was trying to fall asleep to a podcast, one that always helps me go to sleep and not focus on all the creaks and groans that could be my house, but could also be my brain turning out some new horror. I tried to not think too much about the noise, telling myself that it was probably just a stir-crazy neighbor that wasn't handling the quarantine very well. However, just to make sure I didn't see my old hanging friend, I flipped over and risked seeing the tall man for the first time in a few days. Luckily, the podcast put me to sleep in record time. Last night, the noises came back, and I jumped awake. It sounded like shuffling footsteps, like someone was looking for something. I was facing the window and wanted to flip over like before, but my neck was prickling with the presence of something behind me, so I stood my ground at my window, hoping that it would be no different than before, and that's when the eye popped through the slits in my window blinds. I couldn't move and neither did the eye. I didn't have any color, so it couldn't have been the hanging man, who had blood-red eyes. The eye in front of me didn't move or blink. The floor creaked behind me again, causing my throat to swell up with fear, and the eye stayed steady on my face. I wanted to move, but I was just too scared to do anything. Then there was a tapping at the window, like a long fingernail tapping for attention. It just kept tapping, and the eye still didn't move. Tap, tap, tap. My jaw ached from how hard I'd been clenching it. Tap, tap, tap. Then it suddenly stopped. But a voice took its place, alternating with the tapping. I can see you. Tap, tap, tap. I can see you. Over and over again. It never seemed to stop and the eye never blinked. I don't remember falling asleep, but I eventually did pass out because it's now morning, and the tall man, the eye, and the tapping are gone. My jaw and teeth are aching, and my heart has yet to settle down. I called my neighbors to ask them if they had come into my yard, or if they'd even seen anything that night. They all said no. I don't want to go to sleep tonight.